Did you watch? Did you watch the arraignment process? Like, did you watch the live coverage? Any of it?
I didn't watch the coverage, but I think I've not live anyway, but I think I've probably listened to and just about every podcast talking about it that could possibly be listened to. I'm pretty sure, and obviously
side note,
news coverage.
What podcasts are you talking about?
So I listen to a good bit of Daily Wire stuff that they put out. So I'll listen to
like the morning wire, but also beyond that.
Morning Wire. I listen to typically listen to Ben Shapiro, and I'll usually listen to Matt Walsh as well. Occasionally I'll listen to Michael Knowles and just kind of hear the difference in their takes on it.
Who's Michael Knowles?
He's another one of the podcasters off the Daily Wire.
Oh, okay.
I will also typically I will listen to Megyn Kelly. And one of the reasons that I listen to her is because she tends to kind of walk middle of the road for most of it. She leans conservative, sure, but she is sort of middle of the road. She's not overtly conservative like most of the people on the Daily Wire, and she's not super liberal either.
You don't think Megan Fox is overtly conservative?
Megyn Kelly is not Megan Fox.
Megan Kelly? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't think I listen to Megan Fox ever on anything.
The blood drinking celebrity.
I think I've probably listened to the vast majority of her podcast for the last couple of years. And I would say she does lean conservative, but she would be more probably not, maybe kind of in the Mitt Romney, maybe not quite Mitt Romney area of conservative politics. So I think she does lean conservative, there's no question about that. But I listen to her mainly not only because of that, but also because she has a legal background, and the people that she has on are a lot of times not conservatives at all. But they have she's a very good interviewer. She asks really good questions, and she kind of gets to the bottom of the situation really fast. And so I think it's a pretty fair treatment of it, and the people that she has on, she had on yesterday maybe, two lawyers who really, I think, probably represent the left, to be honest with you. They tend to decide on the Trump side of things with this, except for one of them was kind of, questioning some things and that kind of thing. But they were just really insightful and really helpful to understand the legal process of what's going on, which was good. So I tend to listen to those. I think mostly those are probably the ones.
Yeah. It seems like both sides of the aisle, there are people who are saying this whole thing is a sham, that it's a light case at best. I don't know, from all of those 15 podcasts you just mentioned, is there anyone saying anything else that's worth listening to?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. I think there's a lot going on in it that is kind of difficult to unpack and wade through. One thing that's significant is that the charges, like the actual crime underneath that he's being charged with, was not disclosed. And that's a big issue. In New York law, you don't have to disclose it. And that's what Alvin Bragg basically told everybody was, I don't have to disclose it, so I'm not going to. But all of it is predicated on him making a campaign contribution in order to cover up a crime. And the crime that he allegedly covered up that's what hasn't been disclosed yet. So that's a huge problem for anybody that's wanting to know about the case or predict what's going to happen or whatever. We don't know any of that information. So that's what makes it challenging right now. But then another guy I listened to basically said that one big hurdle in this case is the definition of a campaign contribution is very specific. So in order for something to be a campaign contribution, it cannot be something that just merely helps your campaign. It has to be something that you could not do unless you were running for office. So for instance, like the allegation is that he made a campaign contribution with his own money and used it to pay off the lawyer fees, basically, is what he wrote it down in the books as, or what it went down in the books as. And that's the problem, is that the bookkeeping was not essentially what up to snuff or whatever, not legal. But it's all predicated on that being a campaign contribution. And I listened to a guy he was on Megyn Kelly. He was over campaign finance, something, I don't know. He's a chairman of some campaign finance committee or something. And he said campaign finance contribution has a specific definition. It has to be a contribution that you can only make if you are running for office. So for instance, if you bought a car that would help you get from one place to another to make your campaign stops, that's not a campaign. That's not something you can finance through the campaign. If you brought a hairbrush that, helps you makes your hair look good for campaign stops, that's not something that can be contributed to the campaign. But if you took out a billboard that said "Vote for me," then that is a campaign contribution, because you could only do that if you were running for office. So it starts to get into very sticky territory where he was saying he's not even sure that the charge will even stick, because it has nothing to do with the campaign. So therefore, all the rest of the stuff crumbles if it's not a campaign contribution.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
So,
crazy situation we're in.
Yeah.
Crazy times.
It is. I have probably heard the word unprecedented an unprecedented amount of times in the past 10 days in the podcast that I listened to. I mean,
this is unprecedented. It's sad. This is a sad time in America, and
yeah.
Is it? I mean, we had a guy resign from office in the 70s for spying on the other side. I mean, is it unprecedented?
We have another thing is, I keep hearing, even on the Morning Wire stuff, it's like they're obsessed with making it known that this was a porn star. So it's always porn star Stormy Daniels.
Yeah.
We're just engrossed in the scandal of the whole thing. There's a past president who, when he began to run for president, it was published in, I think, Chicago Tribune or something like that he had an affair, that he paid to keep the affair quiet, and there was a child out of the affair, and he's been making ongoing payments for this child. He was never married, and it's Grover Cleveland in like the 1880s, I think, and Democrat at the time, but middle of the aisle, conservative kind of guy, had a lot of votes from both sides, and it was extremely scandalous. And then he turned around and married this 22-year-old girl in the White House, first wedding ever in the White House. And so I'm reading his biography right now, and I'm like, you could make like 4 or 5 bullet points about him and his affair and his payment cover-up, and you couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah.
I mean, he was never charged with a crime. He admitted everything that he did. And he even actually got more votes and more support because he came out as an honest man, and because he was helping this woman who had been put in multiple institutions and helping the child. And so he was like, he got good guy points once it all came out. And there were multiple levels of false stories. She ended up coming out and making a story. She signed a false statement under pressure. Then she came back and gave her own interview later on that said he actually was helpful to her, yada yada. He's the son of a preacher. He's like fifth or sixth generation Presbyterian minister, and he went into law instead of ministry.
She might say
Anyway,
he was
just,
the only boy that could ever reach her.
She could say that. Good grief. The point is, it's
the son of a preacher.
it's
man.
not that it's not that unprecedented,
No.
because
I mean, there are certainly some things.
Have people used the law for political expediency?
Oh man.
Of course. You know, has a past president been convicted of a crime and arraigned? No. But
Well, you know,
it's just not that different than
I think the only
many things that have happened.
the only thing that right now is kind of that's super weird is to be not only to be a former president, to be campaigning to become the next president, to be arrested by your political opponent, and not charged with a specific crime yet. Like, to not even know what your crime is that you're being charged with. I think that is the part where you go, okay, this opens the door to a lot of, issues coming forward. I mean, essentially, we're, I think, entering into a time where Republicans and Democrats are no longer going to fight in the town square and argue back and forth over policy, but they're going to fight in the courtroom. And because essentially the things that he's being charged with right now, at least in the New York case, now I don't know about all the other ones that are coming. There's Washington, I think there's also Georgia, and I don't really know much about them, but I think what is about to take place, I think, is where Republicans are going to start dragging Democrats into the court, and then in turn Democrats are going to drag more Republicans into the court, and we're just going to keep, because I think pretty much every politician could be arrested on these grounds. It seems like not all of it was in relation to a illicit affair, but or an alleged affair, but
which I understand isn't even illegal.
No, and
the hush money payment itself isn't doing that is not an illegal move.
Right. So, but what is, I think, going to, you could probably dig into every politician's books and find campaign finance issues where they, did things not quite by the books and could be dragged into court on the same grounds. So I think that might be different. We could be in some pretty dangerous territory. Maybe you might even say unprecedented. You've heard it again. You heard it here first. You heard it here first, folks.
So, as a pastor then, does this, it just hasn't concerned me that much. It's not much different than the direction of the use of the Supreme Court to make legislation, and cut out a legislative process in the Obergefell case, for example. It's just not, it doesn't feel that new to me as a development in what's going on in America. It's almost kind of like, big shocker. A New York Democratic attorney, put a case forward about Donald Trump in the election. Shocker. So it is unprecedented, like you said, but I don't know. I'm just not that shocked by it all. It's been talked about for a while. So should we be, hot about it, concerned about it, just forget about it, go on with life? Does it even bother you that much?
Well, honestly, like, even as a pastor, some of the things that I think I've been the most thinking through, puzzling over, is how much impact, how much should a pastor engage in the fight of like globalism, of communism, of socialism, when those things, when you see those things beginning to take hold that largely involve the political arena, at least right now, how much should we talk about those things, educate our congregation on? And I don't know if it's, they say the older you get, the more conservative you get. And I don't know if it's because I'm getting older or what, that I see those two spheres blending a little bit more. And where you almost have to say, communism is not Christian. It's antithetical to Christian values. And socialism is antithetical to Christian values, and personal property is Christian. And so there's that side of me as a pastor that thinks like, how much should we actually engage? Like, I have people on all sides of this, not necessarily on all sides of the aisle per se, but really on all sides of political engagement. So some that are like, they'll tell me what happened on the news, before I even make it home. Oh, did you see this? Did you see this? And you feel like that's all they do is they sit home and watch the news, And then I have other people, like I think my wife is one who's like would rather just check out of politics altogether. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to think about it. It depresses me, and they kind of, so I have people on all ends of that spectrum. And how much should politics, especially when it comes to like big political swings that are anti-Christian in their values, how much should that make it into the pulpit? And at what point do we go, I'm crossing the Rubicon at the risk of you calling me a pastor who pounds politics from the pulpit? I'm going to talk about this because it's anti-Christian. You know what I mean? I think that's always my fear, is like, I don't want to pound politics. I'm not a politician. I'm a preacher. I want to take the word of God. I want to talk about it, what it means, and I want to explain it to the people in the congregation. But my worry is like, where at some point that's going to touch on the current political, arena. And at what point do you just go ahead and push into that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, age-old question. I don't know.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
I'm the same way. I mean, you're preaching through Scripture. You're going to come to Romans 13. You're going to come to 1 Timothy, and the call to pray for all people, kings, and all those in high places. You're going to see the example of Israel and Babylon, and the command to do your neighbor good, to do good for the city, even that you're exiled in, as an example for us. So we ought to be concerned about those things. But even the best nation, which is outside the church and under the direct rule of King Jesus and his church and his people, every nation is outside that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a polity, it's a people, it's a citizenship that is unique from the church and from the kingdom of heaven. It's a different line of authority. One is heavenly and eternal, the other is earthly and temporal, and both designed by God, both instituted by God, both government and the church. But yeah, when it comes to the church, I mean, we've talked about this before. I think the church being the conscience to the government, the church being prophetic to the government, but don't really have any authority to, in the name of Christ as the church fight, violence, go to war. So it's, pray regularly in your church for officials locally, nationally, statewide. But I've had a hard time though seeing a lot of social media posts today. I was just scrolling through Facebook and Twitter some this morning, and there's a lot of pray for Trump stuff, a lot of Trump support things, like he's a martyr.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do with that.
This is
I'm not.
Okay, so this is like the it's not just a pet peeve. It's like there's something wrong, and there's this difficult line that I always feel that I'm walking as a pastor, as a husband, as a father, where here is a guy who allegedly did something that's sinful, and that I've heard him compared to Jesus, like Jesus was tried unjustly. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene said that yesterday in an interview. So, I look at that and I'm like, okay, no. First of all, that's not.
Yeah.
We should. There's no comparison between the two people. So, let's set that aside. He's accused of doing something, and there's no crime being brought forward, and so I can look at the court case and I can go, that seems unjust. Not that a person who allegedly did what they say he did, which, I mean, he's saying he didn't do it, so I don't know. I don't know what's right or wrong. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. That's not my fight.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
So, but the point is, he's not like a moral, upstanding guy. And so I'm not trying.
The number of presidents who have had affairs is a long list.
Right. And I'm not trying
aside
to
from him personally.
Yeah, defend anything he did or didn't do and say like, no, that's okay. That's fine. But I can also look at the court case and go, he doesn't seem to have committed a crime that you're accusing him of, and I think everybody needs to be made aware of their charges and face their accuser. Like that seems biblical and just. So on the one side, we're going, this is an injustice. And on the other side, I hear these other people who are also screaming about its injustice and equating Trump to Jesus. And I'm like, no, that's too far. So it's like this weird line, and it's specific to this guy. It's specific to Donald Trump that is so difficult. On the one side, he's been super conservative when he's in office and he enacts policies and things like this and argues for policies. And some of those policies I'm like, I agree with. He's negotiated, he's been a friend to Israel, which I think politically makes a lot of sense globally. And he's been, as far as conservatives, put in justices that I feel like are wanting to interpret the Constitution for the most part. Okay, so those things are good, and I'm glad for that. On the other side, there's an immoral nature to him that seems to just follow him around. Some of the things he's been accused of, maybe he didn't do, and then some of the things he very much did do, and it's proven that he did do those things. And so you don't want to defend those at all. So it's this really weird position that I think a lot of Christians are in. And the concern that I have, and I was concerned about this before 2016, is if Hillary Clinton had won, I didn't fear that the church would, be all of a sudden in league with Washington. But if Trump won, which he did, I felt like the church was in real danger of kind of hitching its wagons to Washington and feeling like, whatever happened in Washington was immediately going to impact the church.
Won.
Yeah, we won. Yeah. And so the kingdom of God just sort of gets lost in all of that and what we're supposed to be as a church. And then all of a sudden you see these pastors going up to Washington and advocating, Trump and all these kinds of things. And it's like, what I do in the ballot box or whatever, I may vote for Trump or I may not or whatever, but I don't see how that is how you have to hitch those things to Christianity inherently. You know what I mean? And so it just, it became this sort of, very troubling situation I feel like we're still in. And I know several Christians in our church are like, I just don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I don't want, I feel like the country is moving in a progressively sinful direction. And I feel like conservative policies might stem the tide on some of that. At the same time, what do you do? It's tough.
Yeah, and I'm thankful there's a couple of the podcasts I listened to said, the greater danger here, there's political leverage to be used one way or the other. You had sent me that picture that artificial intelligence had created of Trump being arrested. And it's got him. He's like fighting, and there's guys pulling him, and his hair's messed up, and he's angry, and he's trying to. And I'm like, that's not how this is gonna go.
No,
that was like last week, because Trump will definitely make this part of his campaign, and use it.
Yeah.
And he came up last night. Was it last night? Tuesday night, and gave a big public speech about it. Big applaud campaign speech, and so. There's been multiple reports that he's taken in millions and millions of dollars as soon as the announcement that he was going to be arraigned came out. So, politically, I think it's not going to change. It's the same news line about liberal Democrat, and it's just making him more like a martyr in many people's minds. It's not really making those lines change. But what I've been listening to by several reporters, and I don't remember the names of the commentators invited on to speak into it, attorneys and such, is what you're getting at before, what this really is in terms of legal precedent, in terms of the legal system being used like this on such a grand public scale in the midst of an election, that the greater danger to America. You take the best man we've ever had. You take Abraham Lincoln himself, and you falsely accuse him, and you make him a martyr, and you put him in court. The greater danger isn't that we would lose Lincoln, or that we would lose Trump, or that some candidate gets lost, but that law becomes a political, machine, where you really want to get at your opponent, find the right court, find the right guy. Does it actually involve a crime? That really doesn't matter that much. The point is we use the court systems. I think a lot of people might look at the impeachments toward both Clinton and Trump, in similar fashions. What was really there? What does this really do? Is it a true intention of the idea of impeachment? Is it a true intention of the law? Because you have a lot of people, complaining about the discrepancies between the New York attorney. He's making this his life, and meanwhile, New York crime is soaring. You've got all these pieces, but so for me, I'm like, I want to step back and go, this definitely isn't about Trump. I'm not worried about Trump. I don't care if Trump loses the election or loses political prowess. I would probably prefer that. The greater concern is the legal system, is the law being torn down, like piece by piece over time, so that now the law is something else. The courts are something else. And I haven't read a ton about history, but there's a great book on Roger Williams. I can't remember the name of it now. One of the first attorneys in America that fought for freedom of speech after being imprisoned because what was he in prison for? Do you remember?
Mm-mm.
So did he go be he was a Congregationalist?
Yeah, he was a Baptist pastor in Rhode Island.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Or
First
maybe
Baptist pastor? I don't know.
No, he's First Baptist Charleston, wasn't it? Charleston, South Carolina?
I don't think that's right.
Or is it Providence, Rhode Island?
I think it's Providence, Rhode Island.
And was he the one that the root grew through his skull whenever they buried him in his casket?
I don't know about that. I've never been to his grave, so I don't know.
Well, I exhumed him and found the roots. No, I don't know. Somebody did.
You found it.
And the root grew through his skull.
But
I think that's the same one.
The point, I remember reading that book and realizing I don't think I knew how significant the rule of law is in our country, what separates it from other forms of government.
Yeah.
The same for, I want to say, the Supreme Court Justice Marshall Johnson, is that his name? One of the early Supreme Court justices. Some of the precedent that he set legally in the Supreme Court system rules our country today. And so it's not like, I hear those things and I'm thinking it's not like, oh, we're just kind of, this is a bad political move. This isn't nice. No, if, our Supreme Court and our legislative process and our, and now this court are just examples of how the use of law and upholding a free and accountable and safeguarded society, that's what's being touched on multiple fronts.
Yeah.
in the recent decades. Not totally unprecedented, but significantly attacked, significantly challenged. And I think that's what this is an example of for me. So I'm like, pray for Donald Trump? Sure, we should be praying for Donald Trump as a former president, as a candidate. We should be praying for all the candidates. We should be praying for the current president, for our current governor, for our current mayor. Sure. But I don't look at this guy like a martyr and think, man, if he goes, that, we're just, it's all going to fall,
Right. Well,
I don't think that way.
You would think of
we ought to be praying for the rule of law itself. We ought to be praying for men to, like Paul says in 1 Timothy, that we ought to be able to live peaceful and quiet lives. That Romans 13, we ought to be praying that our government would praise righteousness, rejoice in righteousness, and punish wicked and evil, and know the difference. And, like Isaiah, not call, evil good and good evil. That's what we ought to be praying for. And that's what this is. That's what this is ultimately about, is what kind of society are we and do we have?
Yeah.
And it's no shocker that, this movement did not happen in like a vacuum of otherwise safe, highly functional, pure democratic freedom. I mean, there's been eroding and concerns for decades historically.
Yeah.
About that, our government, our legal system. It's not new.
No.
It's just, we're just kind of asking the question: where is this going to go? Are people going to vote and put people in office who understand the rule of law, who submit to the legislative processes put forward in the Constitution? Are we going to respect the branches of the government and their limits of authority, or are we going to abuse them?
Yeah.
But
how much longer?
We're still finding out.
How much longer can a country endure the kind of fractured state that we're in right now, where, okay, if let's say this goes to the next step where there's payback. Okay, so there's, Trump goes through this now. Some conservative state out there brings charges up against Hillary, let's say, and pulls her into court. And then every candidate, every president that runs on either side is engaged in tons of legal battles after they're out of office, or maybe while they're in office. How long can we endure that before either one side dominates the other, or the nation is just fractured completely? Which is particularly challenging in a situation like we're in, being a United States. There's for the most part, there is a division north and south, but not really. There's even sharp divisions within states.
Like increasingly.
California is largely red, except for the huge metropolitan cities, LA and San Francisco for the most part, and that carries the state blue. So you have divisions within states like that, and a lot of it's coming down to this the way the rule of law functions. And if you think about like, can Christianity function under communism? Yeah, it can, and it has, and it is currently. Can it function under capitalism? Yes, it can, and it has. So the question is not so much for us as Christians, what are we going to do if, right? That we know the gates of hell aren't going to prevail against the church. You may send them underground, you may silence them, you may limit the voice and the spread of their voice in the town square. That may happen, and probably will happen. But that's a whole different thing than killing the church altogether. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that it's not so much like when the justice system falls or falters, or we start getting into this kind of ordeal, or we see,
banana republics.
We
the
see
big word right now.
Right, we see banana republic type stuff coming up, or we see even like social issues, like transgenderism and things like that are taking root with younger and younger kids and things like that. My fear is not what implications this will have on Christ's church as much. It's more thinking about what is the position of Christians, and how will they easily fall prey to a particular way of thinking. That's one. So one concern that I have is that, like we had just pointed out, that we'll look at this person that's going through this situation and only see two categories. He's either guilty and needs to go to prison, or he's a martyr. And it's actually more complicated than that. It's not as black and white as people want to make it seem. But the trap that a Christian will fall into is, well, I don't think he deserves jail, so therefore he's a martyr. No, he's actually done things that are immoral, okay? And so he's not Jesus. Right? So that's one thing, is like keeping the church and God's people from falling into the trap of, kind of two ideas, that are out there. There's actually different options that we probably need to take, and say, we can say on one end, he's done some things for which he's guilty and needs to repent. And at the same time, I don't think he's guilty of that, or guilty of what you're saying, and he's being unjustly brought into court. So that's one thing, is keeping the church from like falling into that trap, and keeping God's people from falling into that trap. The other thing is what allows the gospel to flourish the most. And I think that's a much harder question to answer, because I think if I were to look around the various countries that are out there under different governments, if you look at where the church is growing most, it's probably under regimes that are, persecuting the church more than allowing it to flourish. But then if I go back into the history of America, what caused the biggest explosion of the gospel was the freedom that was available here, in America. So it's a hard line to walk, I think. And I think we have to struggle for nuance. We have to push for nuance. Like, it's not just as simple as just saying, well, he's being unjustly, brought into court, and so therefore he's a martyr, and things like that. It's actually like pushing much harder into the situation and going, okay, that's not entirely true. And what's going to allow the gospel to function the best, flourish the best? And I think history has proven the gospel will flourish under any kind of regime. So how much am I hooked onto, we must have a country that's free, we must have a country with free speech and things like that, and advocate for that, when I know that even if we're driven underground, the gospel is still going to be preached, and there's nothing that's going to kill God's kingdom. Does that make sense? How do you articulate that? How do you articulate that without sounding like a communist, or like you want communism and socialism to take root? I don't. I want to be free. I don't want people standing at the door of the church and arresting people. I don't think that's good for humanity. I don't think that's good for my neighbor. But at the same time, when do you cross the line where now you're worrying about things that you shouldn't be worrying about? I don't know. I don't know if any of that makes sense.
I don't know. Yeah. I think you cross the line when your public identity, you want to be known and distinguished as someone who has hitched your wagons to a movement and a person and an end and a goal other than Christ. And that could be a hard one too. Does that mean we shouldn't, post things on social media about who we're voting for and try to persuade people in the public square that we should retreat from the public square? No, I'm not saying that at all. That's not helpful to just, exit the conversation, kind of the Benedict option. But at the same time, if what everyone knows about you is that you're a Trump person,
yeah,
or you're not a Trump person, where is Jesus? We're Jesus people. Jesus is the King. We're citizens of the kingdom. That's our polity.
Yeah,
that's our politic. That's our membership. That's our corporate and personal identity. And Jesus is an actual affront and challenge to every earthly throne,
right,
and every earthly people. Even while he's, obviously saving the nations in the Great Commission, and that being our saving people from every nation, there is no. I mean, sure, our nations more or less friendly to Christianity, and in terms of open doors support. America has a long history of supporting religious freedom and being grounded and built on religious freedom in its constitution. But in terms of how I'm responding to what's going on in our world today, what do I want people to know about me? Who do I want people to see me as? And this is another opportunity for people to want to find themselves in one camp.
Yeah.
This is a banana republic, or Trump needs to go to jail. He's a criminal, and so you got to pick a side. Yeah. I'm like, we don't really have a side there. In one sense, I look at this and I go, yeah, this looks political.
Yeah.
That would be my take. And in the other sense, I'm like, this is why the law is there. No one's above the law. So, I'm thankful that the president didn't do what AI thought he would do, which is, resist and start a war, and tell people to revolt and, go light cities on fire. I'm glad he didn't do that in this moment. That could have been eruptive.
Yeah.
Instead, there was a peaceful submitting to the law. For 30 minutes, the president was arrested and could not leave. He was under the order of a court.
Yeah.
And that I think was good in saying, in communicating implicitly, maybe explicitly, that we're all going to submit to the law here.
Yeah.
And trusting that the law is going to have its
but how hard
law is going to have its day.
How hard do Christians fight to preserve America as we've known it? So what if the wagon that you're hitching yourself to is not Trump, not a man, but it's an idea? It's an idea of freedom of speech and freedom of religion, and right to peaceably assemble, and right to bear arms, and right to a fair trial, and those kinds of things. When we know those concepts are justified biblically, right? At least many of them are justified biblically. The right to personal property, things like that. So we know those things are justified biblically, and I would say those are good things. And I think we should have those things. And I think we should push for those things and vote for those things. But how hard do I fight for those things when those things are not inherently the kingdom of God? I could have freedom of speech and not have Jesus, right? So how hard do I, as a Christian, advocate for and fight for those things when that's not necessarily the kingdom of Christ? Though I would say that where Christianity is, a lot of these principles are going to follow. If you had a Christian government, what is that government going to do for its citizens? What's going to protect their right to freedom of speech, right? It's going to protect the right of the freedom of religion and things like that. But you can have the freedom of religion and not have the Christianity on the other side. So I think that's where the difficulty is, especially in this moment in time, is I look at what's happening to Trump and I'm like, that doesn't seem fair to be brought into court. And that doesn't seem just at all, to be brought into court and to not be told what you're being accused of. I think you should have to make the crime clear. This is the crime that you committed, or we're accusing you of committing, and we're going to try you on these grounds. You should have to do that, I think, and that seems just. Mm-hmm. So, and I think I think justice is a biblical concept. God invented justice, right? We wouldn't know justice if we didn't know God. But then at the same time, just because we have justice and we have the rule of law doesn't mean we're any more Christian than we were before, you know? So what am I fighting for? Am I fighting for the rule of law and the preserving of justice, or am I fighting for Christ? And where do those two things cross, and how do I do that? You know, do I just check out politically and just say, look, who cares about any of that? I'm just going to preach the gospel. But it seems like the gospel is actually saying a lot about how our society should function, you know? So it seems like there has to be some overlap there.
It seems like a pleasantly, what's the word I'm looking for? Like it's kind of a luxurious question to even be asking, like in terms of government. Like most of the Christians around the world, in many, many countries, they don't have this. There's not a question to ask. It's revolt and die, or be at peace, try to stick to, put your head down, be a good Christian.
Well, and this is largely the worldview that the Bible is written in. The New Testament, at least, is written in.
Yeah. I mean, so we're going through Acts right now, and you've got at the very beginning, the apostles are immediately put in prison, and they're told by the chief priest, and they're told by later Caesar governments, who are, cuts people's heads off and kills apostles, quit preaching in the name of Jesus, quit telling that Jesus has risen from the dead, quit doing that. And you got Peter's famous statement, we must obey God rather than men. No, we're not going to do that. So when the government or any institution comes and says, you cannot talk about Jesus, you must stop talking about Jesus, we obey God rather than men. And then I think there is concentrically circles down to, when do we begin to do something different? You've got, the question of like Dietrich Bonhoeffer joining an assassination plot against Adolf Hitler. Should a pastor, have joined in that kind of plot? You look back in history and you think you feel like that's a no-brainer. Like so much evil, so immense, a small window of people and a small window of opportunity to try to make this stop. For mercy's sake, for your neighbor, for country's sake, for millions of lives' sake, we would assassinate Hitler together. Was the plot? Of course, that being Bonhoeffer never, that plot was failed. But to put it down to the Trump example, like we're not in that situation where people are outright lives at stake. I mean, you could go back and the abortion thing with children at stake and lives at stake. You could maybe make a different case there. I don't know. That would be another question. But in this situation, we're talking about political expediency. We're talking about the misuse of law, which happens all the time and has happened many times. In the legislative process, it's happened many times. In multiple levels of courts, it's happened many times. And I don't see how this is any different than letting the law work itself out.
Yeah.
You know, even if the intentions for this are ornery and skewed, it is going through the legal system, and it's going to have to face a jury, and it's going to have to face judges, and there are opportunities for appeal. So it's within the legal system, and it's the legal system's job to tell this, New York DA, this is a bunch of, crazy stuff. No, that's not illegal. So we're not going to what's the word, charge for that or, criminalize that. So I think this is a process where the president did the right thing, showing up, taking it, plead not guilty, let his lawyers do the job, and let the legal system do its job. And it could fail. It could do something wrong. It's going to do something wrong. This is not Jesus King territory. This is even men in their best imperfect territory in our government. So, in this specific case, we're not being asked to disobey God. We're not being told we must bow down to this golden statue which Nebuchadnezzar has built, or go into the furnace. I don't think that's the situation that we're in. And so until our government says you can't talk about Jesus, right now,
but I wonder
if you want to, there are some places where those kinds of things are happening.
But
you look at transgender stuff, like you can't say I'm not a girl, and the legal system is demanding in some places, or sports communities are demanding, you must recognize this boy as a girl. We begin to have those kinds of implications, whereas Christians, we say, no, I'm not going to do that.
Well, I
won't do that.
What if it's a little bit more, that's what I'm saying with nuance. Like I feel like if you're thinking through the book of Revelation, there are perhaps tactics at work that do end up shifting our allegiance without us even thinking about it. So,
yeah,
what does it mean to bow down to the beast? It could mean you denounce Christ and just overtly, abandon the gospel altogether. Yeah. But it could also mean
that
your God become
so that you can buy food, kind of situation.
Yeah, but it could mean that you swear allegiance to, or that you become known as the card carrying, Republican Trump voting, person whose salvation. Who sees his salvation in the political process. And I think we are actually very much in danger of doing that. I don't think that the church on the whole is, I know there are churches that are doing this, but I'm saying I don't think the church as a whole is in danger of saying, forget Jesus altogether. And I'm talking about conservative Christian Bible believing churches. I'm not talking about, churches that have already, set sail into the distance, but I'm talking about Bible believing churches. I don't think they're in danger of saying forget Jesus, but I do think they are in danger of saying Our salvation is in this political process. So think about churches, you and I both know of the one that I'm going to bring up, that write a hymn, "Make America Great Again," along with the campaign slogan for Donald Trump. They replace the sermon with interviews from Fox News personalities and things like that inside their worship service, and have "Make America Great Again" services, have the July 4th service where it's got the flag and it's got, outside of sprinkling a little bit of, kind of "God bless the USA" sort of language on top of it. It is largely an American service. It's Americanity. I think we are so much more in danger of that than ever saying, I hate Jesus and Donald Trump is the Messiah. I don't think that's really happening as much as it is going, our salvation is in the Constitution being restored to its rightful place, justice being, everything being adjudicated just so, like it used to be, conservative leaning presidents and things like that. So much more of our abandonment of Jesus is in that addiction to the way things used to be and restoring all of that to its present state, then I think it is abandoning Jesus altogether. And I think that is a lot of what's happening in Revelation. Yes, there is a lot of it that is where the government is coming down with an iron fist and saying, you will, and the Christians are being tempted to submit to that.
You're being killed.
Yeah, you're being killed, yes. But imagine the political or the philosophical ideology of the beast coming to you and asking you to bow down. What does it look like philosophically for the beast to come to Christians and get them to submit? And that's where I think we're in danger. It's really troubling when you think about it.
It is an abandonment of Christ by syncretism.
Yeah.
By saying the salvation that we have in God, that God can give us and will grant us if we're faithful to Him, if this nation prays and seeks God, then He'll save us and save this nation, and this will be a great nation and a free nation.
2 Chronicles 7:14.
That becomes the hope. And if you try to hold that together, say, "Oh, I'm doing that, and that is my." And here's the hard part. I think you could vote for the same person. You could vote for some of the same policies.
Yep.
That are common sense freedom.
Yes.
And one, simply to be doing it because that's the best form of government that I think is good and biblical and fair and free. The next person, we're doing the same voting for the same person. I mean, Trump is a great example. Well, people voted for him for all kinds of reasons in 2016. Right. Some people, it was just for the Supreme Court justices. The guy is crazy, right. But it's our best shot at the Supreme Court. So, we're voting for justices, and you have the same vote, but there does seem to be this kind of cultural, sway. Robert Jeffress, First Baptist Dallas movement that is. Yeah, that was my one guess. That
Jack Graham too, Prestonwood.
Exactly, syncretized in a way that is or threatens to be an abandonment of the actual hope, or actual inheritance in heaven, and of the actual citizenship that we have in Christ and our salvation from the world that we're in into heaven. And it's that kind of, we could end up voting for the same candidate every election for the next 40 years.
Right.
But that's syncretistic hope of salvation will show up in your church too.
Yeah. Well, so what did it lead to?
It's not just a policy about, and so you use Robert Jeffress since you brought him up. It's not just about. This is the greater concern. That syncretism doesn't just stay as a personal policy that I have about what's biblical good for freedom, for you loving your neighbor, and fairness out in the government. it becomes worship in the church.
Yeah.
It becomes something we bring into our worship service. It becomes the songs that we sing when we gather as a church. It becomes the movement that we're hoping to win, and the identity that we see ourselves as. We're not just Christians who happen to live in America. Increasingly, I feel as patriotic as ever, but increasingly I feel myself thinking about myself as a Christian who, by God's providence, lives in this country.
Right.
But I'm a Christian who is an American, rather than thinking I'm a Christian. I'm an American who's a Christian almost.
Yeah.
You know, and that emphasis of hopefulness, it is ultimately bordering, and I think has become for many ultimately an abandonment of the gospel.
Yeah.
Itself.
Well, if you look at what it
a
led
misrepresentation of Christ.
All the people that surrounded Trump from 16 to 20, Robert Jeffress, two Southern Baptists, Robert Jeffress and Jack Graham. Robert Jeffress, pastor of First Baptist Dallas. Jack Graham is the pastor of Prestonwood Baptist Church in Plano. It's in the North Dallas area.
Preston World.
Yeah, Preston World. It's one of the biggest churches in Texas. Which is saying something. So actually probably two of the biggest churches in Texas. So they surround Trump. And another one that was brought in is Paul White, who is a prosperity gospel huckster, not even a Christian, but plays one on TV. And the two Southern Baptist pastors end up promoting her book. And I'm looking at that going, that is what the philosophy of the beast is doing. That is what bowing down to the beast looks like, when it's not bowing down in like a forceful, literally bending a knee and submitting and that kind of thing. That's what bowing down to the philosophy of the beast looks like. Is when you in order to gain the political win, you do whatever is expedient, whatever is necessary, and you really abandon all the boundaries of the gospel. And that's what I think is so challenging about the whole, to bring it back full circle, about the whole Trump trial in New York it's not really even just kind of like what you were saying. It's not really even just about the rule of law or about the justice system. It's more about, as Christians, how do we properly walk that line where we don't fall into the traps that are laid out there, where he becomes the martyr and we're like, win at all costs, and that becomes salvation for us. If Trump gets off and Alvin Bragg gets his and the New York justice system just implodes upon itself, and that's how we'll have salvation, that's how we'll have a win. I can't help but see that as beastly thinking, right? I mean, that's trying to score political points in the here and now. And it's
not bad. It's good. It's just not final. It's just not permanent. It's just
right. And that's the other thing. It's like you don't want to on the other side go, I want communism and socialism. I don't want that. I don't think that's good for anybody. Okay, and I don't think it ever has been. But as a church, you kind of have to walk the line between the two and say no to that and no to that either. We think that we want justice to prevail. And I'm not entirely sure what that all looks like. But what I pray for, and the end that I pray to, is that that justice does come about, even through this kind of seemingly crooked process, that justice ends up prevailing. And at the same time, I think as a Christian, we can sit back and we can be patient, and we can still be loving, and we can still be kind, and we can still preach the gospel. And at the same time, we can say, this stuff isn't right, and where there is injustice, I think we can speak to it, and we can say, I don't think it's right that a person would be accused of a crime that we don't even know what the crime is, that's never even told to him. I don't think that's right. That's not just. And at the same time, I don't know. I'm sure he's done a lot of things that I think are, not good either. And he's should pay a price for that, So it's I think it's just a difficult line to walk. And I think we as Christians just have to be aware that bowing down to the beast is not just a physical intimidation. It's also philosophical. And we really have to keep our eyes open for those kinds of philosophical attacks. And my take on it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And it comes down, it can come down to as close as the affections of your heart.
Yeah.
And what you love, what keeps you up at night, what makes you afraid, what makes you hopeful. I'm going to be preaching Psalm 43 here in a few weeks, Lord willing. And so I've had to start reading on that, familiarizing myself with it. That's correct. And the psalm starts with presumably David, doesn't have a name to it, for God to defend his cause against ungodly and from the deceitful and unjust. And the prayer is for God to do the delivering, for God to do the defending. That you're my God. I take refuge in you. I don't understand why I'm being oppressed. I don't understand why I'm being mistreated, why life is so terrible. I don't understand why life sucks so bad. I know you're letting the enemies win, is what it looks like. But the psalmist ends with, listen, all I can do is come back and praise the Lord. My salvation is God. My joy is God. My hope is God. That's all I've got. And if that's not the deep-seat heart that you have, and you're afraid that we're going to lose something if Trump doesn't get something, or if your candidate or the Supreme Court falls, or if you're afraid for your life, for your temporary well-being, for your eternity, that's not Christian.
No.
That's not the gospel. Jesus, so I was thankful. I was thinking through this with our associate yesterday, and just we were praying through it. And, he was helpful to mention, like there's a Davidic aspect of this. There's a corporate aspect of this. There's a Christological aspect of this. There's a church aspect to this, where this is for all of those people and us. And you see this in the gospel. Christ went to the cross through a rigged court. Yeah. It couldn't be more unjust. Falsely accused, totally innocent. They wrote King of Jews over his head and mocked him, and he died. And he didn't revile, 1 Peter. He didn't revile those who reviled him. He did what we're supposed to do, which is entrust ourselves to the Lord, who is the just judge. And remember that vengeance is his. I think the passivity that the Lord could potentially call us to, without trying to advocate for passivism entirely, that the Christians let God defend me position is more radical than I think we might be ready to believe for a lot of us. And I've thought about it as well. Like, it sounds like doing nothing, and it sounds like letting evil win. It sounds like not caring about people, potentially. But in a sense, we pray, we preach the gospel, we live holy, righteous lives, we're generous, and we let God do the defending. And if we're going to die, we might die losing on earth. And we'll be vindicated in the end.
Yeah.
God will justify his name and his people in the end. He didn't promise that he was going to do that before we close our eyes for the last time.
Yeah.
No one promised us that. Yeah. So, the Lord is the judge. And in fact, we could go on and on. Paul tells the church, you judge those inside the church, God judges those outside.
Right.
God will take care of it just fine. No one's getting away with anything.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Preach pray, live, let God work it out.
Yeah. It's a good message. That'll preach. So you gonna come here
Hope
and
I
preach
get-
that?
Hope if we could just play that, maybe.
Yeah.
That's all I
We'll
got.
get the
That's-
transcript worked out, and you can just
That's all I have.
paste that into
pretty
your
much all
manuscript.
I have to say about that chapter.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. Maybe we can arrange a potluck for that day, and we can just get
It's
to
gonna
the
be
food.
a hymn sing
Get
day.
to the food quick.
It's gonna be a hymn day with a devotion.
Yeah.
That's what it's gonna be. Yeah.
You know, my people will thank you for that. So they'll be like, "Man, we like it when Nathan preaches. It's short."
I'm gonna try to do a 28-minute sermon
Yeah.
and just sit down and
That's-
get
I was
some barbecue.
I was told by a pastor friend of mine one time, if you go short, nobody will hate you. If you go long,
Yeah.
everybody will hate you. So
Yeah. Our associate,
It's
one of the
fairly
first
true.
time he preached was like 30 something minutes. And I saw another pastor, he mentioned this a while back too. His associate preached a lot shorter than him. And he was like, dude, we can't do that, man. you can't. You can't do that to me.
yeah. Yeah.
You got to preach a normal sermon, bro.
Yeah.
You add something.
Yeah. Yeah. When people come up to me and they're like, I like it. He preached shorter. You know, it's like, well, when you don't have enough wisdom, I mean, what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
You know,
When you don't have anything to say,
when you don't have anything to say, then you're
he'll
gonna go
grow
short.
into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'll get better. Give him time.
Yeah. Anyway, well, good talking
All
to
right.
you.